Growing tomatoes is relatively easy in the home garden, and the result is incredible. Better tasting tomatoes than anything you can buy. But there are some important factors to consider. Eli. Hey, Eli.
Hello, you.
You want to chat about tomatoes today?
Absolutely. I would love to chat to you about tomatoes, but I'm in the middle of making up some potting mix just now, so can you give me a second?
Okay, fine. I'll get the video started while you've got more important things to do. Join me today, along with Eli, as we chat about tomatoes. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and while Eli's finishing up making her mix, let's go ahead and start this chat about tomatoes. Most of us have to start our tomatoes from seed indoors weeks before they go out to the garden. So I thought it would be a nice idea to cover some of the factors that we as gardeners should consider when starting our tomatoes from seed. When do we start them? How do we choose our varieties? Are there any containers that are better than others? And how about the size? What size are we looking for transplanting? I enlisted the help of Eli from In the Garden with Eli and Kate, one of my favorite YouTube channels, to discuss, or in Scotland, chat about tomatoes. When it comes to choosing which varieties to grow in our garden, we literally have hundreds of options. Hybrids, heirlooms, whatever you want, you can find a tomato to grow in your garden. But what kind of factors are you using when choosing that tomato? How about the way it looks? Eli?
Oh, you're going to make me admit to it now, aren't you? I'm trying to pretend that I'm all serious and a proper gardener, and you're going to just let everybody know that I'm like everybody and I choose tomato plants based on how pretty they are. I'm not happy about this, Scott. You're giving away my secrets.
Oh, come on, it's not a secret. This is just good information that we can share with other gardeners.
Yeah, okay. As we say here in Scotland, fair dues. Yes, I am very influenced by what those tomatoes look like, the final tomatoes you harvest, because I think that's important based on what you want to do with the tomatoes. So, you know, if I'm wanting to make lovely tomato salads or tarts, I'm going to want nice, colourful tomatoes that catch the eye and look appetising.
Well, it might surprise you to hear that I don't disagree with you. I use color and size of tomato as a big factor when I'm choosing what to grow. I don't make tomato tarts. I don't even know if anybody in the US makes a tomato tart, but I love making salsa from my fresh tomatoes. And if I can mix a yellow tomato with a red tomato and an orange tomato when I make my salsa, it makes the center of the table pop when we dip our corn chips. And the raw tomatoes I use in salads, by all means, I want them to look good. But I'm guessing that's not the most important factor. What are you really thinking when you choose your tomato seeds?
I have to admit, there is a little voice in my head still, even though those tomato plants look amazing and so exciting and would look amazing on Instagram. Yeah, the sensible little voice at the back of my head is still telling me to check for that tomato plant season. How many days will it take for that little plant to mature and produce fruit? And do I actually have enough time to grow that plant and get a harvest? Because let's be honest, even if the only reason I'm growing tomatoes is to take nice photos for Instagram, if I don't get nice tomatoes at the end of the season, it was kind of pointless.
I completely agree. The length of the season should be the primary consideration when choosing a tomato variety to grow in your garden. I have a pretty short growing season. I give myself about 100 days to grow tomatoes. I can't grow a variety that takes 110 or 120 days to reach harvest. It's a waste of my time. It doesn't matter how beautiful that tomato is or how wonderful it tastes. It just won't grow in my garden. So, knowing how long a season you have from your last frost in spring to your first frost in fall, and then matching that to the tomato variety really is the most critical factor. Just as there are a number of options when deciding what varieties to grow, there are a number of options when deciding how to grow those varieties from seed. I do a lot of starting in yogurt cups, and I've used solo cups and even cottage cheese containers. But there is a way that I tend to do most of my tomatoes. How about you, Eli? What's your favorite way when it comes to starting your seeds?
You timed that nice. I'm just about to get some seeds going. Like you, I've collected a whole heap of different seed sowing, shall we say, implements over the years. And yeah, I have developed a bit of a favourite. These are generally what you're traditionally meant to start your seeds in. This gives you tiny little plug plants, a bit like the ones you might buy. The idea being they're in here for a very short period of time, and then you pot them up into a slightly bigger pot. I'm not a fan of these though, but like everyone else, when you're a new gardener, you do what you're told, so I used to start everything off in these. I just find there's not a whole heap of space for the plants. There's not a whole heap of growing medium, and it dries out really quickly. And if you're as forgetful as I am, you lose quite a lot of seedlings because you forget to keep them topped up with the water. So, my favourite thing to do. This is exactly the same as little pots. These little things here, it's just they're all joined together in a tray. Sometimes I'll actually just start 2 or 3 or 4 seedlings in one of these little pots. But it still means I need to be pricking them out and potting them on so all those roots don't get tangled. So sometimes I actually just get lazy and I just sow directly into these trays. I figure, now this is my plan here, you don't have to copy me, I can grow usually about maybe 10, 12 seedlings in this, and they don't get tangled up too quickly. Like this. These are my aubergines. So you can see it gives me space to give all the little seedlings a bit of room. I can bring them on a little bit. I don't have to pot them up quite so quickly. So as someone who's a bit of a lazy, forgetful gardener, I kind of like putting things in pots or seed trays just to make life easier. Does that make me a bad plant mom?
No, it doesn't make you a bad plant mom. It just means you're a bit of a lazy gardener. But that's okay, because I'm a bit of a lazy gardener too. I have evolved how I start my seeds over the years, and I've made some pretty dramatic changes in just the last year. Like you, this is the way that I've been starting my seeds for years and years in this 72 cell tray with these little plugs, and it's worked very well for me. But it means that I then have to transplant the young seedling into a bigger pot, and I usually go to a medium-sized pot and from there to a bigger pot and then out to the garden. But I did an experiment last year that worked pretty well. You can actually start your seeds in a solo cup and just leave it in a container this size or in one of these slightly bigger pots. You don't have to go through all of those steps, and the plants will be just fine, and you can put them in the garden. So while I continue to grow tomatoes in flats like this, I'm evolving more and more into using bigger containers. I don't have the kind that are all connected together, but these are actually going to work pretty well for me. So how about starting the seeds? What time do you start your seeds? How early are you considering when you need to get your seeds started?
There's no letting up with you today, is there?
Oh, come on, just answer the question already.
I think, to be honest, we're going to be the same on this one. It's easier for me to decide about things that are going to get grown in the greenhouse, because basically the greenhouse, even though it's not heated, it's still protected. So when we get those nasty frosts out in the garden that will just burn things up, it's a bit more protected in the greenhouse. So I can afford to put things in here a little bit sooner. And there's also the added value that all that sunlight during the day, you know, sometimes we get sunlight in Scotland, but all that sunlight during the day heats the greenhouse up and it's nice and toasty and really boosts those plants on. But the soil they're in and those black pots that I grow them in hold on to a little bit of that soil for overnight as well, so it doesn't cool down quite as quickly. So it's a bit safer. So for my tomato seeds for the greenhouse, I start them usually early to mid-March, because it's safe for me to do that given temperatures and weathers and stuff. The garden is a whole different kettle of fish though. I'm a bit of a geek and I've got loads of weather data. I can't help myself. What it's let me do though is really look at the weather over the last few years, and I can see when the temperatures, general ambient temperatures in the garden, are at the nice 10°C and upwards, usually upwards, for all my little tomato plants. But also it lets me monitor the soil temperature, because I'm going to be putting those little plants out there. I don't want to give them a shock to the system and put them in cold soil. So I can monitor that, and because of that I know I cannot start my tomato seeds if I want them to go out in the garden any earlier than mid-April, because we're looking at possibly mid-June before I'm comfortable putting tomatoes out there, depending on the weather that year. So I've just got to look at things and adjust for what I know my garden needs, what I know about my temperatures and my weather.
I do agree with that. You raise some really good issues. And I think ultimately it comes down to each individual gardener. We should start our seeds on a date that works best for our garden. Now, my greenhouse doesn't get or stay nearly as warm as yours does. I still have very harsh cold temperatures moving through spring and even into summer. So I have to treat my greenhouse pretty much the same as my outdoor bed. So I don't start some of my tomato seeds earlier than other tomato seeds. I'm starting them all pretty much at the same time. And the seed packet and most recommendations will say start the seeds 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost date. Well, that's a good target. But because my area gets so cold, I need to add at least a 2-week buffer for putting my plants outside. And when they go outside, just like you, I'm checking the weather, I'm checking the soil temperature, and last year I had to delay it another 2 weeks just because it was so cold and the soil wasn't warming up. That typically means I'm targeting mid-April to start my seeds, but the plants may end up being a little big when they do go outside. So is that a factor for you? What do you think about when deciding how big the plant should be for transplant?
Oh, you're still here? Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear you.
Seriously, where would I go? The video's not done. We're almost there. This is the last question. What size are you looking for when it comes to the plants that are going outside?
Right, okay. There's not a simple answer to this one. And let me explain why. I know there is probably something in a book somewhere that tells you the specific size of tomato plant you should have before you put it in its final home, before you transplant. And I know you probably did it in one of your classes when you did your Master Gardener course. But let me be honest here. I have a real issue with a specific pest in my garden. Slugs and snails. Scotland's quite, shall we say, a moist country. We have a lot of damp around, we have a lot of damp ground. Slugs and snails all love it. So as soon as I put little seedlings out in the garden, it's like ringing a bell and shouting salad bar. So I tend to let my plants get a little bit bigger before I put them out in the garden, possibly slightly bigger than I should. I'm wanting robust little plants that, you know, basically when they get munched by the slugs, they'll survive and they'll kind of recover. So I tend to pot on, shall we say, to their final homes when they're probably about this size, just when they start to look healthy and like, you know, they're happy and they're going. And the way I tell that is how the plant looks. Obviously, we can all tell when our plants look really, really happy. And as soon as I notice all those little roots coming out the drainage holes in the bottom, that's when I know the little guy's run out of space and it's time to put him in his final home.
That's a good tip. I try to get my plants to be at least 8 inches tall for transplanting, but I let the plant talk to me. I want to put a healthy plant in the garden, and if it's starting to outgrow the pot, as you pointed out, with the roots popping through the bottom, it's telling me that it's time to transplant. If the soil is warm enough, I'll put it outside, but if it's not, I'll put it into a bigger pot. It's better to keep the plant happy, whether it's a 6-inch plant or a 10-inch plant. Putting it into the garden at the right time is more important than deciding what size of plant to put out. I don't have slugs here, but I've got heavy winds and really harsh sun. So for me, a more established and a healthier plant is going to survive better at transplant, regardless of what size or height it happens to be. Now, no more questions, Eli. You can be done. Go back to all of your work. Sorry to interrupt, but thanks so much for all of the important information that you shared. And Eli and I are going to be doing a series of videos over the course of this year where we're sharing the information. We're growing the same exact tomato plants in as close a way as we can, but 2 very distinct environments for our growing. So be sure and follow along with that. And as those videos are ready, I'll highlight them, like this one right here. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.